The wind was a blade, honed on the unforgiving peaks of the Sierra, and it cut through the thin fabric of her dress like it was gossamer. Elara huddled deeper into the meager shelter of the rocky overhang, her body a trembling knot of cold and fear. Snow, fine and relentless, swirled into her face, stinging her eyes, melting instantly on her frost-kissed skin. 3 days. Was it 3? The days blurred into a single, agonizing stretch of hunger, cold, and the crushing weight of despair. She had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate, naive hope that simply being away would be enough. Enough to escape the suffocating expectations, the arranged marriage to a man twice her age with eyes that held no warmth, the future meticulously planned for her without her consent. Now, huddled against the indifferent rock, facing a death far colder and lonelier than any life she might have endured, she questioned the wisdom of her flight. Her feet were numb blocks, her fingers stiff claws. The meager crust of stale bread she had clutched protectively was long gone. Thirst gnawed at her throat, a counterpoint to the icy chill permeating her very bones. She was adrift in a vast, white emptiness, a speck against the monumental indifference of the mountain. Then, a shadow detached itself from the swirling snow, large, dark, and unervingly still. Elara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Bear? Wolf? The thought was primal, terrifying. But as the shadow drew closer, solidifying into the shape of a man and a horse, a different kind of fear coiled in her gut, the fear of discovery, of being dragged back to the life she had risked everything to escape. The man was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a heavy, fur-lined coat. His face, when he finally paused a short distance away, was weathered and unreadable, framed by a low-brimmed hat dusted with snow. His eyes, dark and sharp, scanned her with an intensity that made her feel utterly exposed, despite her layers of despair. He said nothing for a long moment, his horse blowing steamy breaths into the frigid air. The silence stretched, heavy with assessment. Elara couldn't speak, couldn't move. She was a creature cornered, expecting judgment, perhaps even cruelty. He dismounted with a quiet efficiency, the movements of a man accustomed to the harshness of the wild. He didn't approach immediately, respecting the invisible barrier of her terror. Instead, he pulled a flask from his coat, uncorked it, and took a slow drink. Her eyes, wide and desperate, fixed on the motion. He paused, looked at her again, and then, without a word, held the flask out. It was not pity in his eyes, or at least, not the kind she recognized. It was something harder, perhaps understanding, perhaps just a weary acceptance of the mountain's indifference to human suffering. Hesitantly, her stiff fingers fumbled, reaching for the flask. His hand was steady as she took it. The liquid within was strong, biting not water, but something that burned pleasantly down her throat, spreading a fragile warmth through her core. Whiskey, she thought dimly. He watched her drink, his expression unchanging. When she lowered the flask, he took it back, recorked it, and then looked towards the deepening twilight. "Can you stand?" His voice was low, rough like granite, but devoid of threat. Elara tried to shift, a gasp escaping her lips as pain flared in her frozen legs. She shook her head mutely, a tear freezing on her cheek. He knelt then, slowly, offering no sudden movements that might startle her. He didn't touch her but examined her frostbitten hands, her numb feet visible beneath the hem of her dress. A frown, faint but discernible, creased his brow. "You won't last the night here," he stated, a simple fact, not a threat. "It's a few hours' ride to my cabin. If you can make it a few hours?" It sounded like an eternity, an impossibility. But the alternative was certain death. The cold was already seeping into her bones, slowing her thoughts. She looked at him, this silent, formidable man who had materialized from the storm. He was an unknown, potentially dangerous. But the mountain was a known, certain end. The choice, stark and terrifying, was survival or surrender. She nodded, a small, jerky movement. He didn't offer a hand, didn't push. He simply stood, a silhouette against the swirling snow, waiting. The first step was agony, the second, third. Each movement sent jolts of fire through her deadened limbs. But the promise of warmth, however distant, however uncertain, fueled a flicker of will she hadn't known she still possessed. He helped her mount his horse, a gentle pressure at her back, then swung up behind her, wrapping his large coat around her shoulders. The horse turned, and they moved slowly through the deepening blizzard, swallowed by the vast, indifferent white. The ride was a blur of biting wind, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves muffled by snow, and the surprising, solid warmth of the man behind her. She leaned back against him, exhaustion finally claiming her. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. His silence was a vast, protective space into which she could retreat. Hours later, she felt the horse stop. A door creaked open, spilling a rectangle of warm, golden light into the darkness. He dismounted first, then lifted her down carefully, her legs still weak and trembling. The warmth that enveloped her as he guided her inside was overwhelming, almost painful after the prolonged cold. It was a small, simple cabin, clean and sparse. A fire blazed in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. The air smelled of pine smoke and something else, something earthy and wild. He led her to a rough wooden chair by the fire, urging her down gently. He didn't hover. He moved with quiet purpose, removing her wet cloak, tending to the fire, pouring water into a pot to hang over the flames. He worked with the efficiency of a man used to solitude, used to providing for himself. Alara watched him, her initial terror subsiding into a cautious curiosity. Who was this man? A trapper? A hermit? He seemed as wild and untamed as the mountain itself, yet there was a quiet strength, a contained energy, that was strangely reassuring. He prepared a simple meal, stew from a pot simmering on the hearth, thick bread. He placed a bowl and spoon before her without a word, then sat opposite her across a small table, eating his own meal slowly. The stew was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, warming her from the inside out. She ate ravenously, self-consciousness forgotten in the face of gnawing hunger. He watched her, his gaze steady but not intrusive. When she finished, he pushed a mug of hot, weak tea towards her. "Drink," he said. Slowly she obeyed. The silence between them was not awkward, but held a quiet weight, like the unspoken history of the mountains outside. Finally, she found her voice, thin and reedy. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat still rough. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her gratitude but not inviting conversation. She hesitated, then felt compelled to explain, however briefly. I ran away." He met her eyes. There was no surprise, no judgment, only a depth that suggested he had seen much, understood more than he let on. "From what?" he asked, his voice low. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. She could tell him everything of the stifling life, the forced marriage, the desperation. But the words caught in her throat. "From a life I could not bear," she finally managed. A simple truth that encompassed a world of unhappiness. He considered her answer for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The mountain is a hard mistress," he said, his gaze drifting towards the small window where snow still fell. "She doesn't suffer fools or the unprepared." It was a warning, not unkindly given. He didn't ask her name, didn't offer his. It was as if they were two temporary figures in this remote space, their presence dictated solely by necessity. He showed her a rough pallet on the floor near the fire. "Sleep," he said. "You'll need your strength." She lay down, wrapped in a thick wool blanket he provided. The fire crackled, a comforting sound. Outside, the wind still howled, but inside the cabin, there was warmth, safety, and the silent presence of a man who had offered sanctuary without asking for her story, her name, or anything in return. Sleep came, deep and restorative, the first peaceful sleep she had known in what felt like an age. Days turned into a week, then two. Alara's initial fear of Silas, for that was the name she eventually heard him answer to when a lone prospector briefly visited. Slowly dissolved, replaced by a tentative ease. He remained a man of few words, his presence a quiet anchor in the vast solitude. He spent his days trapping, checking snares, and chopping wood, his movements economical and strong. He taught her small things, not with words, but by doing. How to safely carry wood, where to step in the snow to avoid drifts, how to mend a tear in her dress with rough thread. He never commented on her lack of skills, her unfamiliarity with the harsh realities of mountain life. He simply existed, and she learned by observing by necessity. Her hands, once soft and useless, grew chapped and stronger. The terror that had driven her flight still lingered, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was slowly overshadowed by the immediate demands of survival and a growing sense of resilience. She helped where she could, washing the meager dishes, sweeping the cabin floor, learning to make simple bread over the fire. One afternoon, while Silas was out, the prospector from before, a grizzled man named Jed, stopped by again. He looked at Alara with an assessing, unpleasant gaze that reminded her too much of the life she'd fled. "Silas keeping you, is he?" Jed's tone was leering. Alara felt a hot flush of shame and anger. "I am a guest," she replied, her voice trembling slightly but firm. Jed chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Guest, are ya? Don't see many guests out here. Heard folks are lookin' for a runaway girl. Rich family." Offering a reward, he watched her closely, his eyes sharp with avarice. Alara's blood ran cold. They were looking for her. The mountain hadn't hidden her completely. Jed took a step closer, his grin widening. "Mighty pretty girl like yourself. Could fetch a fair price." Before he could say another word, the cabin door opened quietly. Silas stood there, his presence filling the doorway, radiating a silent, powerful warning. His eyes, fixed on Jed, were cold and hard as glacial ice. He didn't speak, didn't make a move. He simply stood, emanating a palpable threat that stopped Jed in his tracks. Jed's smile faltered. He visibly swallowed, his gaze flicking from Silas to Alara and back. "Just passin' through, Silas," he mumbled, backing away. "Thought I'd see if you needed anything." Silas said nothing, his eyes never leaving Jed's face. Jed shuffled out quickly, closing the door softly behind him. The air in the cabin felt thick with unspoken tension. Alara stared at Silas, her heart pounding. He hadn't asked, hadn't demanded an explanation. He had simply protected her. He turned then, his gaze softening as it met hers. There was a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken danger, a shared understanding that transcended words. That night, a storm raged outside, fiercer than any Alara had yet experienced. The wind hammered at the cabin walls. The snow fell in blinding sheets. Inside, the fire crackled, a small defiant heart against the fury. Alara couldn't sleep. The encounter with Jed had shaken her, bringing the reality of her past crashing into her precarious present. She sat by the fire, wrapped in her blanket, listening to the storm. Silas sat across from her, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. The silence between them was different tonight, charged with the lingering threat and the power of his protection. He said they're looking for me," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Silas stopped, cleaning his rifle, looking up. "I heard," he said simply. Did he know it was me?" Silas hesitated. "He guessed," he said. "Folks talk. A lone man out here, suddenly with a young woman. It invites speculation." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "What will you do if they find you?" The question was direct, unavoidable. She looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in her eyes. The image of the life she had fled rose before her, the suffocating rooms, the cold eyes of her intended, the judgment of society. She had nearly died to escape it. Going back was unthinkable. "I won't go back," she stated, her voice gaining strength, a steel she hadn't known she possessed. Silas nodded slowly. "It's a long way back," he said, "and the way forward is just as hard. Maybe harder." She knew he was right. There was no easy path, no simple solution. But looking at this man, this quiet, capable man who had offered her refuge, a fierce determination settled in her heart. She would not be a victim. She would not be dragged back. She would find a way to survive, to build a new life, here in this wild, indifferent place or somewhere else. She met his gaze, her eyes reflecting the fire's light. "I know," she said, "but I won't go back." The storm broke by morning, leaving the world pristine and silent under a fresh layer of snow. The confrontation with Jed, and the subsequent quiet conversation, had shifted something between Alara and Silas. The unspoken barrier had thinned. She was no longer just a refugee he had rescued. She was someone who had made a choice, a stand. And he, in turn, had revealed a protective instinct that went beyond simple human decency. The threat of pursuit was real now. It hung in the air, a constant reminder of the precariousness of her freedom. Silas began to teach her more deliberately, things she would need if she were to survive independently or if they had to move on. He showed her how to track, how to set a simple snare, how to identify edible plants and roots once the snow melted. He taught her how to use the rifle, the weight of it in her hands, the careful aim, the sharp recoil. Each lesson was given with the same quiet efficiency, a focus on the practical necessities. She learned quickly, her determination a sharp spur. Her hands, once delicate, grew calloused and strong from chopping kindling and handling rough tools. Her eyes, once wide with fear, became sharper, more observant, learning to read the subtle signs of the wilderness. One afternoon, scouting near the cabin, they found recent tracks, too many, too deliberate to be Jed or another lone prospector. Riders, looking. The quiet life they had built was exposed. There was no more hiding, not here. They had to move. Swiftly, efficiently, they packed the essentials, food stores, blankets, the rifle, ammunition. The cabin, their small, warm sanctuary, was left behind, a silent witness to their flight. They rode deeper into the mountains, choosing less traveled, more dangerous paths. The journey was arduous, a test of endurance and will. The mountain, always a presence, seemed to watch them, testing their resolve. Alara, though exhausted, kept pace, her newly found strength and resilience sustaining her. She no longer felt like the helpless girl who had stumbled into Silas's path. She was a partner now capable of contributing, of enduring. Days later, high in a remote, protected pass, they made camp. The air was thin and sharp, the silence profound. They sat by a small, carefully concealed fire, sharing a meal. Silas looked at her, his gaze steady. "They won't follow us this far," he said. "Too risky." Even for a reward, relief washed over Alara, deep and cleansing. She was safe. For now. What happens now?" she asked, the uncertainty of the future looming. Silas poked the fire with a stick. "That's up to you," he said. "You can't go back. Not safely. But the world is wide. You could go south, find a town, start fresh," he paused. "Or you could stay. Learn to make your own way out here." The choice was hers. A new beginning, but in a world that offered no easy paths. She looked out at the vast, star-filled sky, the towering, silent peaks. The mountain had nearly broken her, but it had also forged her. It had stripped away the trappings of her old life and revealed a core of strength she hadn't known was there. And this man, this silent, stoic man, had been the unexpected catalyst, the quiet protector who had allowed her the space and time to find herself. She looked at Silas, at his rugged, honest face illuminated by the firelight. He had asked for nothing, judged nothing, simply offered survival and the tools to build her own. The lonely cabin, the shared meals, the quiet lessons, the silent protection. It had all woven itself into a bond forged in hardship and necessity. Alara felt the weight of her past, the escape, the near-death, the transformation. She was not the same girl who had run from her wedding. That girl was gone, shed like a skin in the harsh mountain air. The woman who remained was scarred, yes, but also stronger, clearer-eyed, and fiercely determined. She had faced her fears of the cold, the hunger, the pursuit, the unknown, and survived. She had found an unexpected connection in the most isolated of places, a partnership built on shared silence and mutual respect. The future was uncertain, a challenging path winding through uncharted territory, but it was her path now, one she would walk on her own terms. The mountain, once an enemy, now felt like a stern teacher, a place of brutal beauty and profound self-discovery. She knew the struggle would continue, that resilience was not a destination but a way of life. But looking at the quiet strength in Silas's face, the understanding in his eyes, Elara felt a gentle, unfamiliar stirring of hope. She had not just survived. She had begun to live, and perhaps, just perhaps, she would not have to face the wilderness entirely alone. A new beginning. It wasn't a promise of ease, but a promise of possibility. And for the woman who had run from a life she couldn't bear, possibility was everything. The fire crackled, casting long shadows. The stars shone down, cold and distant, upon the two solitary figures in the vast wilderness. They were survivors, yes, but more than that, they were pioneers of their own lives, standing on the precipice of a future they would build together, one difficult, determined step at a time.